I'm back after a longer than expected absence of exactly to the day 3 months. But I feel like I've never been away because I'm raring to go. Because tonight may be a turning point in our country's affairs. There's something in the air, and it's not just the acrid smoke of corporate manslaughter. It's not even just the flames that seem likely to spread across the north of Ireland in the marching season as the Good Friday Agreement reaches a moment of peril. It's that our government is burnt out. It's the mother of all talk shows. Scores of people are dead, maybe hundreds are dead. Who knows? We are waiting as the casualty toll, the death toll rings ever louder in Grenfell Tower, which is close to where I live. Some of the people in that tower went to school with my own children. They're my neighbours. They're known to me. And in the west of London, there is that pall of darkness, a pall of anger and fury. And we'll be examining some of the reasons for that over the next 3 hours. There is the outrage that scores, maybe hundreds of people were scorched and incinerated because of corporate negligence. I make no bones about this, and I don't need a public inquiry to tell me that whoever signed off the deal to save £2 per square metre on flammable cladding rather than inflammable cladding is guilty of manslaughter. And I don't want another public inquiry. Remember Chilcot, anyone? I want arrests and I want prosecutions. I want to know who made that decision and why they made it, because that decision signed the death warrant for maybe hundreds of people. I want to know why there was no sprinkler in that tower. I want to know why there was no fire alarm in that tower. And as for those fools bleating about the damage to a door at the Kensington Town Council Hall, they are lucky for the forbearance of the British people, because there are many places and many times where it wouldn't have just been the door that was damaged. The people responsible for this are responsible for manslaughter, corporate manslaughter, and they should go to prison for a very long time. I want to know why Boris Johnson didn't see that closing fire stations in London, that dismantling firefighting equipment, that decommissioning fire appliances. I want to know why Boris Johnson, promoted to Foreign Secretary, did not understand when he was Mayor of London that whatever saving he made by closing these fire stations, wrecking these appliances, sacking these firefighters, might not have to be paid for by something much more valuable than gold, paid for in human blood. I want to know why the government thought that freezing the pay of firefighters for years would render their congratulations and best wishes to those same firefighters today utterly bankrupt of any moral content. We love you, Mr. Firefighter, Ms. Firefighter, we love you. That's why we've frozen your pay, sacked your colleagues, decommissioned your engines, closed your fire stations. We love you, really, you know. I want to know how it came to pass that we, in 2017, are living in a rentier economy, where 25 billions of public money every year is being paid out to landlords in housing benefit, when we could and should be using that money and more to build safe, quality, public housing so that there would be no need for the rentiers. This is a turning point, I believe, because our government was already burnt out before Grenfell Tower. We have a Prime Minister so bereft of moral, political and parliamentary standing that she is forced to go cap in hand to the bigots of the Orange Order and the so-called Democratic, so-called Unionist Party in order to form a government. A Prime Minister who called an unnecessary election, had to scrap her own law in order to do so, demanding an increased mandate, a bigger majority, then lost the majority that she already had and seeks to cling on to power by the tassels of an orange sash. That's strong and stable, Theresa, isn't it? I want to know, because I'm hot foot from Manchester. I want to know why this cell of jihadists, of the Libyan Islamic fighting group, the clue was in the name, Theresa, had their control orders lifted, their passports returned. I want to know why our security service, under the command of the then Home Secretary Theresa May, facilitated the passage back and forward of the Libyan Islamic fighting group, which ended in a hail of red-hot, razor-sharp steel, which cut down young children, their hearts beating fast with the excitement of the concert they had just watched. I want to know who is going to take the responsibility for that. I want to know, Boris Johnson, why you removed the railings from London's bridges, making it possible, not once but twice, for fanatic, head-chopping extremists to go on their murderous rampage. I want to know why we came to have a government that has spent the last 7 years feeding the beast of Islamist fanaticism and imagining, if indeed they did imagine, that it would never come home to us. I want to know how long this miserable, wretched government with no majority beyond the marchers of the 12th of July, I want to know how long they are going to sit there. How long are you going to sit there, Theresa May, for all the good that you have been doing? In the name of God, go. Now, Kieran Daly says, George, why doesn't May just walk? She can't talk and look people in the eye. What chance have we got? May, go. Well, I'll tell you what, Kieran, I think she's going to have to go. I believe that Theresa May will have to stand down, not just for the events in West London, but because it's not just one damn thing. It's as Mr. Macmillan once said, it's one damn thing after another. Let's hear from David in Primrose Hill as the first caller of the evening. David, welcome to the show.
It's so nice to speak to you again. Shalom, salam, George. It's absolutely wonderful. I've missed you all the time that you've been away.
Thank you. Very kind of you to say. What would you like to talk about, David?
Well, you've uttered every single sentiment that I had to say for myself. And what you always say, give us a ring if you think you're hard enough. And I agree. People should ring you, and they should agree when you're absolutely right and you've hit the nail right on the button. I walked past Andrew Mars the other day, walking down with his mobile phone and shuffling along on one side and saying, I'm feeling very sorry for her. She's a very nice woman. I've known her for 7 years. He was walking back. I felt sorry because he'd had a heart attack, but I didn't agree with his sentiment. I said she'll be out within 6 months. I guarantee it. And the reason for it is that the economists have not learned the lesson from Keynes. The only way you get out of economic problem is you expand your economy. You don't contract it. You don't cut the nurses down. You don't give them a 1% pay rise. There's 41,000 nurses missing. And you don't put Jeremy Hunt back the minute you become a prime minister. They absolutely make me sick.
Well, I think that you have articulated the feelings of millions, maybe tens of millions of people in this country right now. And that was the meaning of the general election result. A general election that was called when Corbyn was 25 points behind the Tories. And he ended with the biggest increase in the Labour vote since Clement Attlee in 1945. He ended with more votes than Tony Blair in 2005. He's breathing down her neck. He has the authority to lead, and she is now bankrupt of that authority. If you call an election to get an increased majority and you lose the majority you already had, in what kind of political universe do you have a mandate to continue? Especially as she's never won an election, ever. She became the Prime Minister through the back door.
I only hope they would bring you back into the Labour Party again to support him, because you are one of the strongest speakers there are, and you can put your points over succinctly and vociferously, and it's a great shame that you're actually not there to do it, because you do it far better than a whole load of others.
David, you're too kind. Thank you very much. David in Primrose Hill for kicking us off. Here's this one an SMS from Peter. Mr. Galloway, good evening. We appear to have the support now. Please, going to start that revolution tonight. The country is screaming out for change. Peter in Glasgow, who signs off, Viva Corbyn, Viva indeed Corbyn. Peter, I want a peaceful, democratic revolution. I want a complete change of the Guard, a complete cleansing of the Augean stable of Westminster and Whitehall and the Commentariat and the BBC, because that is what has brought us low. I don't want to continue the manure metaphor, but the stench has become unbearable, and millions can now smell it all too obviously. Mohammed is in Maidenhead in Berkshire. Let's go to him next. Mohammed, welcome.
Good evening, George. It's Mohammed. I don't know if you remember me. It was Mohammed from Bristol before. We spoke on comment a few times.
I do. I remember you very well. Go ahead, Mohammed. Thanks for calling.
Thank you, George. Obviously, I want to talk about the fire, the Greenfell fire. Yeah. I think, obviously, it's really heartbreaking and disastrous what's happened. And when you look at the Telegraph and they go over some of the causes, the potential causes, they've spoken about a faulty fridge, faulty wiring, cladding on the outside, lack of entries and exits, and lack of sprinkler systems as some of the potential causes. And when you think about society and how it's become, apparently they were warned that this building was not well equipped.
They were warned by the people who were living in it. But hey, what did they know? They were only poor people who happened to be the tenants. They were warned by the residents' groups. They were warned by campaigners. They were warned by experts. This cladding, Mohammed, is illegal to buy in the United States of America, where you can buy a machine gun at the supermarket. You can buy a machine gun at the supermarket, but you can't buy the cladding that they put on Grenfell Tower to save £2. £2 per square metre, Mohammed.
Yes, and when you think about what you just said, George, it's true. They obviously didn't prepare for it well. What are they going to do now to prepare for potential future causes where there'll be fires again? What are they doing now to prepare for that? They're not doing anything to prepare for that. And it reminds me a bit of society. It's become desensitized. There are lots of signs and reminders, and this building is an example of that, and people are turning blind eyes. You know, Allah teaches us in the Quran, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. You know, Allah created us to test which of us are best in deeds. Allah also created us to worship Him alone. So when you look at society, it's become starved from truth, starved from guidance, starved from reminders, and, you know, not giving heed to reminders. So having someone like you going out there talking in your passionate way, George, is really refreshing and inspiring.
Thank you, Mohammed. I appreciate that very much. Now, Soraya Boyd is a local resident. She saw what happened, and I want to talk to her. Soraya, welcome to the show.
Hello, George, and thank you very much for affording me an opportunity to share my experience.
It's our honour to provide that opportunity. So let's start at the beginning. When did you become aware of what was happening? And tell us what you saw and experienced, if you would.
Certainly. Actually, I became aware of it at about 10 to 3 in the morning. My daughter received a phone call from a friend of hers whose mother lives on the second floor. And there was such panic in her voice. And she basically asked my daughter if she could come along and help her settle her mother, who was terribly distraught. So my daughter came along, woke me up, and she said, "Mum, Grenfell Tower is ablaze." So we got ready and dressed in under 2 minutes and rushed out there. Luckily, we live on Cambridge Gardens, and so therefore that's the part that intersects with
Yes, I know it well, yeah.
Bramley Road, indeed. So we were able to be there in 2 minutes. But of course, by the time we were there, we were actually bearing witness to a site that was absolutely incredible. No, it wasn't a Hollywood set movie. It was actually at the heart of my community and neighborhood. And what we gazed upon was a blaze of fire, which engulfed the whole of the building.
A glimpse of hell, really.
Absolutely. You couldn't have described it any better.
And how close did you approach?
Well, there were cordons, so we could not get very close, but it was sufficiently close to then bear witness to a horrific sight, knowing that we could hear screams, knowing that there were people there who were absolutely helpless, powerless, very much as we were outside, knowing that we couldn't go and rescue anyone, knowing that everybody, whether on their own, like this chap with his 2 lovely dog companions, or others who were hosting friends from America over to dinner, or families who were just fast asleep, knowing that parents were, as parents should and would, gathering onto themselves their children and try to reassure them as best they could by kissing them, by stroking their hair, by telling them they love them, knowing that in a very short period of time, all would perish.
Well, I'm lost for words at your eloquent description of that. Now that the flames are out, though smouldering, what is the feeling in the community?
Well, my personal view is that I have lived where I am for 20 years. And so when I draw my curtains, when I open my window, my sitting room window, Grenfell Tower has been part of my skyline for all of that time. So I've seen it in health prior to the refurbishment. I've seen it with the cladding. I've seen it ablaze. I've seen it charred. And now I can see right through it.
Now, feelings are running very high. I'm not going to ask you for your view on who is to blame, because you may not wish to opine on that. But you must have...
Certainly, I don't mind at all. I think that we have created and given a great primacy to a culture where no one is to be apportioned blame. But I think that we need to establish a completely different culture where principles and morals are the guiding tools that orient our thoughts, our words, and our actions. And obviously, we have, gone a long, long way away from that. So I'd like to see when the process of investigation takes place, I'd like it to begin from the beginning, right through to the middle, right through to the end. I don't want the end process to simply scapegoat a particular contractor who was subcontracted by another contractor, who in turn was subcontracted by another contractor.
Right.
Everybody needs to be taken responsibility.
It was the ethic, not the contractor. The ethic was that these were poor people without a voice, who could not meaningfully bring their concerns to bear because nobody listened to them. They were only the tenants. They were only the people who had to live and die there.
Yes, I think there is a general undercurrent. In my view, I am not conservative. I'm not Labour. I tend to favour more of a socialist outlook in terms of the politics, if I were to be pressed to define myself. But I think in view of conservative policies, having lived in KNC for 36 years, and as a teacher, I would be inclined to give them 6 Ds. The first one is destruction. The second one is division, particularly in regard to the bedroom tax. They uprooted entire families from their community. The third one would be devastation. The fourth one would be death, because all of the concerns that were raised by the Grenfell Tower Action Group were completely unheeded, and they raised that very spectre. They talked about the possibility of a significant event relating to fire. And I think that, let me go on to the other, despair, because those who have been affected are deeply traumatized and in a state of profound despair, and the last one would be death. Now, as a teacher, if I were to hand my students a piece of work with, 6 Ds, that means it's a wake-up call. You really need to, gather yourself and start focusing in order to make progress, with support, etc. But these are not children. They're not students. They are grown-ups. They are adults. They are professionals with a statutory duty. And in my view, that statutory duty should emphasize the primacy of the preservation of life over the primacy accorded to the beautification of the exterior, with a view to entice potential developers in regards to investments in the order of millions. So I think they have failed absolutely abysmally. And now, regrettably, many have lost their lives, could have been avoided. But in my view, the members of the local authority, should they remember that they have a heart, a mind, not just a brain, or to remember that they really have blood on their hands.
Soraya Boyd, a local resident, as powerful and as eloquent a telephone call to which I or any of you, I think, have ever listened. Let's hear from Norma, who's another wonderful caller and an old friend whom I've missed. Norma,
oh, that's
welcome.
Nice. I'm not your intellectual butt, and it's lovely to hear you again.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry you didn't get Win Gorton, but this is not what it's about, really. It's only a small point. They chose this cheaper cladding for Grenfell Tower. And guess what? Taxpayers' money 400 million is going to refit Buckingham Palace. And I think it's awful. The Queen, she could sell Balmoral or any other of her houses. She could pay for that herself, and that money could go to whatever is needed for Grenfell Tower. I just thought that was a point that I wanted to make, really.
Well, I don't know if the number is right. If Buckingham Palace needs to be refurbished, it needs to be refurbished. If we're going to have a queen, she needs to have a palace that kind of goes together like a horse and carriage. It's not either or. It's an ethic that we began to grow in the 1980s, the loads of money era, where hucksters and spivs and rentiers and developers and bankers and other assorted dross began to be elevated to a new status in our eyes. Suddenly a spiv was not someone to be reviled, but someone to be respected. The spiv became increasingly the norm. Loads of money. I have considerably more money than you, as the old sketch used to say. We started to stop building council houses and sell council houses instead. We started to subsidize private landlordism. Now at £25 billion a year. Get your head round that figure, Norma. We're giving landlords £25 billion a year of public money because their people, their tenants, cannot afford to pay their rents. Think how many public houses we could have built already with £25 billion a year. Worse than that, Jeremy Corbyn tabled a motion in the last few months demanding a law which made it an offence to provide housing which was unfit for human habitation. And Parliament voted it down. And worse than that, at least 80 of the Tory members of Parliament who voted it down were themselves private landlords.
Yeah,
in any sane system, they would have had to recuse themselves from voting on the grounds of pecuniary advantage, or in this case, disadvantage, if this motion had passed. But they didn't. They stayed, and they spoke, and they voted, and they rejected Corbyn's motion to make houses fit for human habitation. You really couldn't get much worse than that.
No, it's awful.
Well, I mean, if people put up with a Prime Minister without a majority, clinging by the tassels of an orange sash to power, when all these disasters have occurred on her watch, a double watch, as Home Secretary, then Prime Minister, the London Bridge, the Manchester Arena, the cuts to the police, 21,000 police sacked at a time of increased danger in the country, thanks to her own government's foreign policy, who sacked firefighters, closed fire stations, who starved vital public servants of a wage increase, whilst giving themselves fantastic wage increases, straw hats and trumpet wage increases. A government which went for an election and lost the majority that they had. If people put up with that Prime Minister continuing in office, then there's something very seriously wrong with us as a people. But I believe that the response of the public since the first of what turned out to be 3 terrorist outrages convinces me that the British public are not going to take much more of this. Norman Bristol, thanks very much indeed for your call. Kira Robinson said, by Twitter. I said from the start that the coalition with the homophobic DUP could maybe hurt the peace in Ulster. Surely peace in Ulster is far more important than anything. Well, Ciara, just a minor point. I always put the word Ulster in inverted commas because, of course, not all of Ulster is in the statelet of Northern Ireland. Ulster was gerrymandered in order to provide what they thought was an everlasting majority for people like the DUP, and other parts of Ulster are in the Irish Republic. But you're absolutely correct. The continuation of Theresa May in government risks social peace in both Britain and Ireland. The marching season, which always brings mayhem, though it's not always reported over here, will be reported in minute detail this summer. And that marching season, if I'm any judge, will be greater mayhem than ever. And it will bring home to the British people exactly what it is that in order to cling to power, our Prime Minister has gotten under the duvet with, and it's not a pretty sight. Guy is on the line from Stoke-on-Trent. Let's hear from him. Guy, welcome.
Yeah, good evening, George. Good to have you back.
Thank you.
George, if I can do the good followed by the bad. The good, I was delighted that Jeremy Corbyn did so well. When you consider those treacherous MPs who lobbied against him.
Imagine how far he would have gone if the MPs had got right behind him when he was elected.
It's unbelievable what could have happened if they'd supported him. But luckily, he's got a good team now, and he seems, some of the people now who are supporting him seem good. They seem to put a good argument and support the guy.
Well, his core team is very, very good. Both elected members and in his office, they have confounded them all. But the 172 backstabbers are all still there. They're all still MPs, of course, because Jeremy Corbyn kept them in a job.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk about this, but it does make you wonder what the hell you did to manage to get kicked out of that party for just talking about the Iraq war.
Telling the truth, I think, is the fastest way of summing it up.
Yes. But going on to the bad, George, Grenfell, and I think this typifies, it's indicative of what's going on with the fire precautions down there and throughout the country. That in one of the London Assembly meetings, it was the Fire and Public Protection Committee, Boris Johnson, I'm going to call him Bojo, was asked a question by one of the Labour councillors about how cutting 10 fire stations and making 600 firefighters redundant in the city would actually make the city safer. And the expensively educated man told him to go and get stuffed. Now, that man's been paid, what, £3,000, £4,000 a week, and that's the strength of his argument.
Yes, I wonder if he learned that line at the Oxford Union or in the Bullingdon Club. Go and get stuffed, he says to a member of the London Assembly, questioning his judgment in closing fire stations, sacking firefighters, decommissioning fire engines in London, whose population of poor people in whose homes most fires occur. It was an act of criminal lunacy on the part of Boris Johnson, and I said so at the time to Paul Embry, the fine leader of the London Fire Brigade Union, on television and on a demonstration outside City Hall. It was an act of criminal lunacy. And since then, Guy, I have learned that the railings that were put up on London's bridges were removed by the very same Boris Johnson because he thought they were ugly. Well, not quite as ugly, Boris, as the sight of madmen driving high-speed vehicles into pedestrians on the pavements, which they could not have done if you hadn't removed the railings. Boris Johnson is a dead political duck. He is a dodo. Even the British Conservative Party could not possibly be insane enough now to make him their next leader. What do you say?
Well, you've taken the words out of my mouth. They've got a problem, haven't they? Because if June saw the end of May, it certainly hasn't seen the springing of that bojo. But the next thing I want to say, George, is that, how can it be that a mother wraps a baby up in some linen and throws it out of the stories of a building which is alight in London in 2017?
With no fire alarm. A tower block with no fire alarm, with no sprinklers, and clad in material so flammable that it is illegal to use it in the United States of America. You couldn't make that story up.
It's also illegal in Germany.
Well, I expect it to be illegal in Germany because the Germans have far greater levels in the public realm of standards than we, unfortunately, in the last 30 or 40 years have become used to. But in Donald Trump's America, where you can buy guns at the supermarket, it's illegal to use that cladding. Just let that hang in the air, Guy. Thanks very much indeed for the call. Ian David Jones sends a tweet: when you are getting a police escort out of your own capital, then the end is near for the Prime Minister. And Dan says by SMS, it can be nothing other than corporate manslaughter. This government prides itself on being a government of deregulation. They fear tightening safety regulations will dissuade house building. Well, if this is the standard of house building that would be dissuaded, then it's safer for all of us if it remains so. Mrs. May's response to the tragedy has been simply catastrophic. She is utterly lost. Change is coming, says Dan in Surrey. Very well put. And my old friend Marie McFarlane says riots at Grenfell not revolutionary. Trotskyists, otherwise known as ultra-left opportunists, small group, not representing the masses. Well, that's not the feeling in West London, Marie, I can tell you. Everybody, including Soraya, as respectable, impeccable, a lady, a teacher, a neighbour, just so powerfully on the radio, not half an hour ago, made clear. Have we got time for Jim? Jim in Brighton. Go ahead, Jim.
Hello, George. Great to speak to you.
Yes.
Firstly, George, I'd like to congratulate you on your latest addition to the Galloway clan.
Thank you so much. Five and counting.
I've seen a few pictures on the Facebook, which I don't normally look at, but I have to say it's a mixed blessings. But Gorton's loss is our gain on a Friday evening, I have to say.
Thank you so much.
But my main point is this, George. I find it ironic after the election last week that you couldn't get a greater symbol than the tragedy in West London, in a borough like Kensington and Chelsea, where you find the situation of, I couldn't imagine what some of those houses are worth a mile or two away, with 10, 20 million.
No, 100 yards or so away.
Is it that close?
In Cambridge Gardens, where Soraya lives, a house there would cost you upwards of 12 to 15 million pounds.
God, yeah, I'm from London, but I've been living down in Brighton for a few years now. But, I was just thinking in terms of Jeremy's slogan, for the many, not the few. I just think it's tragically ironic that this should happen in a borough like Kensington and Chelsea. It's so symbolic. It rings true now more than ever than during the election campaign.
Oh.
I know that's it. I just don't know.
Oh, sorry. Well, you put your point powerfully and perfectly, Jim. It is as a piece of symbolism. It will be absolutely historic. It's historic in its own terms. I don't know if you know, but 6 people perished in the Great Fire of London, and perhaps 100 people or more have perished in this fire. I tried to find any fire, Bradford, any of the other great fire disasters in Britain that came anywhere close to this level of fatality, and I couldn't find a single one that could possibly have breached 3 figures. I could have looked further, but I did not find a single one. So it's historic in that sense. But it's historic, too, in its symbolism. In Kensington and Chelsea, the perfect memorial to the get-rich-quick, pack them in and make as much public money as you can while you're doing it. You could not get a more ugly monument to Thatcherism and the kind of politics that governs the Kensington and Chelsea Town Hall than what happened this week in Grenfell Towers.
Absolutely, crammed in like battery chickens in many ways. But yes, one other thing I want to ask you about, George, is with this terrible incident happening, is the shadow cabinet. I haven't really seen much of who's included. I think Owen Smith's included, isn't he?
He is. He's the shadow Secretary of State for the North of Ireland.
And what about the likes of...
So we can't ask where's Wally anymore. We know that he's in Belfast.
Yes, and what about dear Yvette Cooper and Chucker Moon? Are they included in any...
No, they're not. No.
Well, I did think one slightly devious thing Jeremy Corbyn could do is include the likes of them until hopefully there's another election in September and October, and have it looking like a broad church, and then once Labour's...
Well, Jeremy's not that kind of fellow, I'm afraid. Jim in Brighton, thanks for the call. This is the mother of all talk shows. Well, you know, the Grenfell Tower story just keeps getting worse. The official narrative is now that 70 people will have lost their lives. It's, of course, distinctly possible, given the kind of housing that was there, that there may well have been people for dinner, people staying overnight, people out of the country who are missing but in fact safe. There can only be a level of confusion as to how many people have perished. But firefighters say there's in excess of 100 people dead there. And I think that we should listen to the firefighters, to the residents, to the neighbours, when they tell us that this is an incredible disaster, and moreover one that was man-made. It was human-made. It was not something that came as a bolt out of the blue or out of the sky. It was something that was predicted by the very people who lived there and may have died there. It was predicted by their residents' groups and minuted in their official minutes that they were deeply concerned at the cladding that had been used, at the absence of a fire alarm, at the absence of sprinklers, and many other issues too. So, a human-made disaster on this scale requires heads to roll. I'm sorry. For those who say we shouldn't politicize a matter such as this, nothing could be more political than this. Somebody made a decision to save £2 per square metre in the cladding and bought the flammable stuff rather than the inflammable stuff. And the stuff they bought is illegal, even in Donald Trump's America. So dangerous and so toxic is it. Well, whose head is going to roll? It won't be sufficient for some hapless official of the Housing Association, the ALMO, It won't be sufficient for it to be some official in Kensington and Chelsea's rather plush town hall. It won't be sufficient even for the leader of the council to fall on his sword, and it's incredible to me that he has not already resigned. It won't be sufficient because this all flows from an ethic which was willfully and deliberately grown by the Thatcherites and their obescent media over the last nearly 40 years, namely, to know the price of everything and the value of nothing, namely, to know that what matters is the bottom line, the profit to be made from public services and public enterprise. Kensington and Chelsea was cleansed by Dame Shirley Porter decades ago, which ended in disgrace and exile for Dame Shirley. But the Conservatives and their ethics, their twisted, perverted ethics, were never punished in the borough. It's one of the reasons why that most unlikely of events took place on the 8th of June, when Kensington elected a Labour Member of Parliament. Imagine. But this goes right to the top. And it's not just this damn thing, it's one damn thing after another. Now, Ahmed, on a mobile, is on the march in Downing Street right at this moment. So let's hear what's going on from the front line. Ahmed.
Hi, George. Pleasure to speak to you.
Tell us, Ahmed, what's happening there, would you?
Yeah, just to correct you, we're not at Downing Street. We're actually at the site of where the people perished. We're looking at the tower now.
Okay, tell me.
So we marched from the City Hall, where people congregated on the steps. Before that, they tried to march into the town hall. People made it in, but the police were able to get the people out. And then we was on the steps, some fiery speeches, and then from the site of the steps, we marched all the way here to the site of where so many people perished. People are angry, very angry. They're angry because of two main reasons. Firstly, they feel like the number of the people that perished is being concealed, because the powers that be know if they reveal the real number of how many people perished, they have a riot on their hands. So people are angry because the truth isn't allowed to be there in the open. And the second reason people are angry is because they feel they're on the verge of another whitewash. There'll be another inquiry. It might take 20, 30 years before truth or justice is enacted. And by that time, this becomes a memory. And that's why people are really angry. They feel that no one's head's going to roll. No one's going to be held accountable for what happened to those people.
Well, that's why I said from the first minute that we don't need a public inquiry. We need charges. We need the police to charge people. And we need the authorities to prosecute them. Because it's quite obvious that criminal negligence is at play here. That someone, maybe many, did not do their duty to the public, to their own tenants. This goes right to the top in Kensington and Chelsea, and in the bigger picture, it goes right to the top in Downing Street.
Yeah, well, that's the cry here. People are shouting, Theresa May has got to go, Theresa May has got to go. But there's been another chance of people saying, Theresa May murderer, Theresa May murderer. Now, naturally, people are angry. So, and that's why people are making these statements. Sorry, I'm just on the radio. You can take a photo. I'm just on the radio. No problem. Sorry, someone wants to take a picture of my T-shirt. And the reason why people are so angry is because they feel if this tower had been inhabited by people that weren't poor, the people who weren't Muslim, the people who weren't black, weren't brown, then this wouldn't have happened. There's no way a tower in one of the more affluent parts of town could have no fire alarms, could have no sprinklers, could have flammable material all around the building. This just wouldn't happen if it was in another part of Kensington and Chelsea. And that's what frustrates people. A lot of people are aware of the fact that their lives are valued less than others, but never has it been so stark, never has it been so obvious and in their face as it has been over these last couple of days since the tragedy happened.
Who do people blame for the slowness in identifying the number of dead people? A lot of people are asking, Christina's just asked on Twitter, why are the public not updated by the police on the death toll? Is there a D notice imposed on the mainstream media? Well, the answer to that, Christina, is no. There is no D notice. In any case, D notices are advisory to editors, and I can assure you, if there was any information on my desk here that was advised not to tell the public, that would be a green light for me to tell the public. There is no D notice. So isn't this just because it's a huge tower block? Because the police cannot know how many people were in the tower block on the night? It's just not possible, given the carnage caused by this inferno, to get these numbers out any more quickly.
Yeah, well, I think that is true, but then there's the common theory that's been spread here by various people I've talked to, is that the numbers are being micromanaged, that the emergency services have actually got a much higher figure, but they're micromanaging it and letting the public know incrementally about these figures. Now, I don't know. I'm just spreading the information that I'm hearing here on the roadside. So,
well,
I
if that was their tactic, Ahmed, it's very foolish and going to backfire, because this number, if it keeps on growing, will be an ever bigger growing indictment on the people responsible for this.
Yeah. Well, I've spoken to neighbours that were there, and they're telling me that the people that were on the 14th floor above, they don't understand how they would have made it out because of the speed and the fury in which the fire spread. So if you imagine the flats are 24 floors, and they're saying that people on the 14th floor above would struggle to make it out, then that means the number's going to be a lot higher than the confirmed 34.
I can tell you that the number that is being given now on television news is 70 dead.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So that number has leapt in the course of the day. I mean, I blame officialdom for many things. I'm not sure I can blame them for the slowness of ascertaining the...
I'm not sure if I blame it myself. I'm just sharing the information.
Yeah, sure.
That's here on the road. But what I will say is, if you walk down the street here, every wall, every fence, every gate has a missing picture with a different face on there. And that kind of gives a figure of just how many people are still unaccounted for, just how many people could be added to that list. Because if it's been 3 days since the incident and there's still people that are missing in the age of social media, in the age of instant communication, then I don't want to say it, but the picture doesn't look too great.
Ahmed, I'm really grateful to you for that eyewitness account of what's happening right at this moment at the scene of the crime. Thanks very much indeed for calling us. Christina, I answered you. Alan Nichols, good evening. In my opinion, the tragedy of Grenfell is a consequence of a systematic assault on people who have no voice, no money, and no future to look forward to. Pretty much sums it up. Keep tweeting me. Trotsky has. He says the Duke of Devonshire opened up Chatsworth House to pupils to board in World War II. Why can't the Queen do her bit for Grenfell residents? Well, actually, I think the Queen spent a bit more time with the residents than the Prime Minister did on her fleeting and secret visit. Gavin sends an email, says May must go after that election. Me and my brother have both joined the Labour Party in the last week, and this after being enthusiastic yes voters for Scottish independence only a few years ago. How times are changing, and with the SNP, etc. Well, Gavin, I would have liked in other circumstances, maybe I'll get a chance later in the show to talk about the situation in Scotland, which is, of course, of particular importance to me. I may say I predicted all of this. A year ago, I predicted peak SNP and that the only way was down. I've won a £2,000 bet with a prominent SNP supporter, and he's stepped up to the plate, and I'm donating it with him to St. Vincent de Paul in Glasgow. And when I predicted they would lose more than 12 seats, in fact, they lost very much more than that, and only narrowly averted losing very much more than that. The idea that people would prefer a future with Latvia and Bulgaria and Romania and Slovakia rather than with Liverpool and Manchester and Cardiff, especially if those places were governed by a Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party, is just ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. Dan says Corbyn is within touching distance of number 10. Fresh off the campaign of his life and having decimated May's majority, he stands ready to govern this country. The people are ready for change. That's what I feel, I must say. Now, let's hear from Mark in Tunbridge Wells. Angry of Tunbridge Wells. Go ahead, Mark.
George, it's disgusted. You get it wrong every time.
Sorry, mate. Disgusted of Tunbridge Wells. Go ahead, mate.
Angry and disgusted. If you could see where I'm parked up, I'm parked up overlooking Bateman's down in Burwash, where Rudyard Kipling lived. And I'm just thinking about him being someone that was all about nationalism. That I think
Jingoism.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think it's a great shame today that we're falling for the same rubbish while we're going on about Brexit and an unelected Prime Minister triggered Article 50, and then she's called an election. And in the meantime, basic human rights of places to live for people not being on the street. Me going into a supermarket yesterday and noticing there's sprinklers everywhere, and yet for human beings, you put sprinklers to put out the biscuits off them on fire, but human beings in this country are not allowed to have somewhere safe to live. You let people live on the streets, and there are people dying like this, like animals. You know, what is wrong with this country?
Well, I saw a quote from Matt Rack, the estimable leader of the Fire Brigade Union, who said that no one has ever died in Britain in a fire where there was a sprinkler system. Now, that says it all. The idea that any house doesn't have basic fire alarms and that a tower block doesn't have a sprinkler system and that its entrances and exits are badly designed and prepared for this kind of eventuality, and that it was clad by something so toxic and flammable that you can't buy it in Donald Trump's America, that's enough to disgust all of Tunbridge Wells and all of Britain, don't you think?
George, I think we need someone like you to go to this Parliament and say to this bunch of crooks, you people you're doing the same thing with the British people. It's like Christmas politics, saying to a child, what would you like for Christmas, and diverting our attention away from real issues. We need to forget about this Brexit thing and start having distribution of wealth from both sides of the house.
Well, I did say earlier this evening before I came on air that this manure, to give it a polite name, that is decomposing in Westminster and Whitehall, not just amongst the politicians, but the mandarins, the people who actually rule us, the so-called Fourth Estate, which is really a sink estate, a media that serves like slaves the power and the wealth. We need to clean this Augean stable. It's a Herculean task, but it has to be grasped, or a once great country will fade and die. I believe that.
Yeah, George, I genuinely believe when I talk to people on the street, all kinds of people, when I talk to them, say the same thing. This country is going to end up a civil war. If we keep lurching this far-right policy, nationalism, the extremists, the terrorism, eventually someone's going to cotton on and say we need to start arming up and bringing down these people in power because they're rotten as a pair.
Well, that's not, of course, the British way, and pray God that it never is. But we have the democratic power. We can get Theresa May out. We can bring this government down, and we must, because she has lost any scintilla of authority in the country. As someone pointed out on Twitter, and I read it out moments ago, when you've got to get a police escort out of your own capital city, then you're doomed. And I believe that the Prime Minister is doomed, and her period in office may only last days, if I'm any judge. Maybe by next Friday we'll be talking about the race for a new Prime Minister, and then we'll have to make sure that a government that's clinging to power by the tassels of an orange sash has to face the people again, sooner rather than later. Mark in Tunbridge Wells, thanks. Stan is in the northwest, and he wants to talk about Grenfell. Go ahead, Stan.
Hello, George. It's an honour to be able to speak to you.
Thanks, mate.
I've just got one very, very important thing to say about Grenfell, and I've tweeted it, but I'd like to get it out on your radio show.
Mm-hmm.
The most important thing immediately is to ensure that this doesn't happen to any other block of flats in the UK or anywhere, actually. And we know that, for example, there are 3 different types of cladding manufactured by the same manufacturer that look the same. One is fireproof, one is fire resistant, and there's this polyethylene type, which we've seen is ridiculously inflammable. The flames went shooting up the outside of the building, burned through the window frames into people's windows. They had no chance. Now, it's not a 1 in a million thing. It's quite likely to happen again. It's happened in Dubai, it's happened in Australia, it's happened in France, and it's not just banned in Germany and America. It's banned in half a dozen European countries, Denmark, I can't remember the other ones, but several others. Now, the type of people who are involved in the contracts for these claddings are subcontractors, and there's a chain of subcontractors from the people who initiate the job to people who actually put the stuff up. So I entirely don't trust documentary evidence about what type of cladding is put on what particular block of flats. And what I'm suggesting is, to save lives immediately, is that people are sent out with basically a tin opener and a sampler, and the means of sampling what is under the cladding of all the flats in the UK. Now, one guy could do 1 block of flats in half an hour, so it's not an impossible job. They should be sampled, and any that have this polyethylene type insulation under them should be either ripped off or a thing called a drencher system fitted on the outside. It's similar to a sprinkler, but it produces a sheet of water that runs down the outside. That's the most important thing I have to say. I've got several other things.
It's enough, Stan, because it's very powerful, and it's something practical that the government must take responsibility for right now, because were this, God forbid, to happen anywhere else, to anyone else, then the mood in this country would turn in a way that has not been seen for centuries.
George, it's an explosive mood out there at the moment. I've got nothing to do with London. I'm up in the northwest, but my blood is boiling because these. Now, look, Lily Allen was castigated for saying 150 as a possible number. Mm-hmm. She got those figures off the record from police and fire service personnel. Mm-hmm. They don't make things up. Now,
of course they don't. And the very people that were castigating her were the same people that have been wrong about absolutely everything. Well, in the last decade or more.
Absolutely. Let me just say this about the numbers. There are 2 numbers. There's an estimate, which people in the job inside the building know there's an estimate. But the forensic examination that's happening now is a slow process and may take 2 or 3 weeks. And until that is done, the exact number won't be known.
OK. Thanks for that, Stan. Brilliant call. Now, we're joined on the line by Sian Berry, Green London Assembly member for the Green Party, chair of the Housing Committee, even more importantly, and she's been extremely busy, as you would imagine, in the wake of this disaster, but she's been able to join us for a few minutes, and I'm grateful for that. Sian, thanks for coming on the show. What are your initial thoughts on this catastrophe? I call it a crime, but let's agree it's a catastrophe.
I agree with you there. I should point out I'm speaking as an individual assembly member because the committee has not been able to, this is a fast-moving situation,
Sure.
So we don't have a committee view on this yet. But, obviously I'm horrified. I went down to speak with some of the residents, talk to the media yesterday, and the sight of that tower, this huge blackened hulk must be full of people, is absolutely horrifying. Today we're seeing, I think, a different kind of reaction from people, though. I mean, it's emerging more and more clearly that the residents' concerns that were being raised were not listened to, and people were already angry, and those people who were already angry with the council, it's bubbling over in ways that I think are important, but also, slightly worrying, given that, we don't want to see any violence on the streets. So it's a fast-moving situation, but I think people are right to be furious when residents have been raising some of the problems that might have been responsible for the disaster. People are bound to want to call for people to be prosecuted, for heads to roll. So yeah, it's
they were ignored because they were poor people, weren't they? If this had been a luxury tower block filled with rich people in Kensington, then they're concerned, well, it would never have arisen in the first place, because a luxury development, of which, as you know, in London there is a proliferation, would never have been built without a fire alarm, without sprinklers, without proper entrances and exits. And it would never have been clad in material that would go up in smoke and flames.
Yeah, I mean, there's the question about, how much money goes into different types of housing, but also how the residents are treated, how much agency residents have over decisions that are made about their homes. And what had happened in the Grenfell and in the surrounding estate was residents had got organised. They'd formed a group. This group was checking things, was putting forward proposals, and they were not treated as if they were a group representing the residents. They were treated like pests, like troublemakers. They were sidelined, and that's really dangerous, and it does betray an attitude towards people who live in council homes, that they shouldn't have a say. This paternalistic attitude you see from so many councils, and it isn't just Tory councils, that we know best, that we can't give residents a proper say. That absolutely has to change, because it's not just this was a deadly error that was made. Whatever's caused this was a deadly error, but just having a good life, being able to have a view on how the gardens are done and how the stairwells are painted. This is important for people to have agency over their homes, and people did not have this, and many council tenants across London do not.
You're right to make the point that it isn't just Tory politicians that are in bed with property developers. I think we both made the point last year about how unwise it was for the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, to be taking substantial donations from property developers, some of them with the dodgiest of reputations. We need to see a break, don't we? A break between this unhealthy relationship between politicians and developers.
People were on the demonstration today from Haringey. They had a banner that says Tottenham stands with Grenfell, and they were making the point that they're not being listened to either, that Haringey Council is making plans to sell off a 50% stake in its council homes to a private developer who will have far more say over what happens to their homes than any of the residents. And there's a very organised campaign in Haringey to try and prevent this happening, but it's being pushed through the council with a small number of councillors. We have the same situation brewing in Camden. They're looking at the future of their council home redevelopment. They're considering a strategic partnership with a big developer. This is not confined to Tory councillors. And it's not confined to London either. We've seen the same things in other cities, in Glasgow as well. They sold off all their council homes. We've got a real issue here, and people need to be fighting back. And the laws should be changed, because you'll get all kinds of things done better, not just fire safety, if you put residents more in charge.
Last question, because I know you're busy. The council is, of course, as true blue a Tory council as you can get. They must have thought that they were invulnerable. What role does the Housing Committee of the GLA have in this? Are you able to call to account, to hold to account local authorities in London?
We don't have powers of summary over anything other than the GLA, the police, the fire service. We can call them in and they have to come, but local councils do not. Previously, when there was a fire in a tower block in Southwark, the Assembly's Housing and Planning Committee, which is we changed the committee structure since, they did an investigation. They made recommendations about what should happen next. I don't know at the moment which part of the Assembly might look at this and whether we will, but I think there is a role for us. We represent all of Londoners. I've obviously been going out and looking at the causes of this, talking to people. The Mayor of London's been there. We are all there to represent all of London and to look at things at a London-wide level. I think there is something we should do, but at the moment I can't say which committee or when or anything like that.
Sean Berry, thank you very much. Green Party, London Assembly member and chair of the Housing Committee, though speaking in a personal capacity. Thanks for joining us. Murray is on the line. I don't know from where, but he wants to talk about Grenfell. Go ahead, Murray.
Hiya, George.
Hi.
I'm from Glenrothes in Scotland.
Okay.
I'm just calling about, I think the whole issue is capitalism. I mean, it's trying to get as much money for as little work as possible. I mean, when you look back at all the other stuff that's happened, even if you go back to the sort of Volkswagen diesel emissions, everything, the tobacco corruption that was years ago, it's all about screwing working people for profits. And I think that when the government steps in and builds more council houses and goes through the proper regulations, you'll see an end to all this corruption that's going on with the housing market.
Well, I agree entirely, and one of Jeremy Corbyn's many policies about which I was enthusiastic was a massive drive for public housing, not arm's-length public housing, not public housing for the benefit of developers and speculators, but public housing run by elected people so that you can re-elect your landlord or you can deselect your landlord if you think that they are not doing a good enough job. That's what this country is crying out for, and it would put hundreds of thousands of building workers to work. We have the men and women, we have the material, and we have the demand, we have the need for that public housing. And Jeremy Corbyn intends to put all those things together. But that's not going to come out of this discredited, broken-backed Conservative government.
I know, and I just think I can't wrap my head around why working class people, continue to vote for a Tory government that serves 0% of their interests.
Well,
I can't understand it.
Take a look at Robert Tressel's immortal, ragged-trousered philanthropist, which I've just done a voiceover for, just done an audio book of, and you'll see that that's been happening for a long time, Murray. Thanks for that call from Glenrothes. Sean Caden, my old pal, says heartbreak and anger at the disaster at Grenfell Tower. Even Tories must agree this May fiasco must end now. I'm sure that Tories are currently planning their next step. Kira Robinson again says, what I did about ERA at university, I always thought, why march through Republican or Loyalist areas? It's asking for trouble, and there will be trouble this summer, that's for sure. Michael Hassett says, what are your views on Northern Irish institutions being restored? How do you see the DUP-Tories potential alliance playing out? I'll turn to that, Michael, after this. Just before the break, I was asked what I thought about the lash-up between the Conservative Party and the DUP. I mean what I'm about to say next in all seriousness. The DUP risks tarnishing its reputation by getting into bed with Theresa May. It's that bad. Really, it's that bad. The idea that Britain can be ruled by the Democratic Unionist Party is utterly risible. It could only lead to trouble. Trouble here in Britain and trouble in the north of Ireland. It is illegal under the Good Friday Agreement for the British government to show partiality on a systemic basis to one side in the political division in the north of Ireland. And Sinn Féin have already pointed that out to Theresa May in Downing Street. Moreover, the very first, and this may be the first, this Grenfell disaster may be the very first, but there may be many more. The first act by a Tory government against the interests of working people in Britain will be blamed on the DUP. It will be blamed on unionism. It will be blamed on what they call Northern Ireland. And British people will say, wait a minute, what are we even doing in Northern Ireland? What is Northern Ireland even doing here? Not just in Parliament, but at the very heart of the state. The Daily Telegraph said, in the run-up to the general election, that Jeremy Corbyn intended to take Britain back to the 1970s. But that's exactly what Theresa May has done. We now have a hung parliament, a minority government, clinging to the tassels of an orange sash in order to stay in power. And for what? What can that government achieve? Can it seriously negotiate Brexit, the biggest issue since the Second World War? A government that's only in power because of the Orange Order? Don't be silly. How could they possibly? What else can they do? What else can they achieve with a majority based upon the Democratic Unionist Party? And here's another point. I never thought I'd hear myself say this. The majority of people who vote for the DUP are working class men and women. They themselves will be victims of Tory policies, made possible only by the parliamentary support of the DUP. So I mean this. I say this to, I don't know Arlene Foster, but I know Ian Paisley Jr. very well. I say this, Ian. I say this in all sincerity. You're going to damage your party's reputation. You're going to damage unionism's reputation. You're going to damage what you call Northern Ireland's reputation by propping up a discredited, broken-backed, defeated Tory government. Tom is in Darlington, and he's up next. Go ahead, Tom.
Hello there. Hi. I'm just ringing George just to mention about the tragedy in London. I've just been seeing little bits of it on the TV, and I just want to say that the fire service did a magnificent job, rescuing as many people from the block of flats, and they should be given some kind of recognition and bravery awards to go in there.
Well, I'll tell you what would be a decent recognition, Tom. A decent recognition would be for the London Mayor now, Sadiq Khan, to reopen the fire stations that Boris Johnson closed, to recommission the decommissioned appliances that Boris Johnson dismantled, and to bring back the firefighters that Boris Johnson sacked. And then maybe the government might consider unfreezing the pay of these heroes who, when others were running away from the blaze, They were running into it. Go ahead, Tom.
Very brave. Yeah, the Tories aren't going to do that because they just want to slash and cut, and I've never understood why people have voted for someone like that who's obsessed on cutting back on everything. You know what I mean? It's just wrong. You know, people have criticised the Labour Party for like spending loads of money on taxes and all, you know, people's taxes, but you need infrastructure, George. That's what's needed, proper infrastructure to carry out decent services.
Tom,
and that's what's needed.
Tom, there's no civilization without taxation. If you want a fire engine promptly when you dial 999, or a police officer when you dial 999, if you want an ambulance, if you want a good doctor in the hospital and good nurses and good technicians in the hospital, if you want streetlights, if you want pavements that aren't full of holes, if you want roads that don't look as if they've been cratered by an RAF bombing raid, if you want decent schools for your children, if you want decent social care for your old mother, if you want the paraphernalia of civilization, you have to have taxation. If you don't want taxation, you don't get civilization. It's really as simple as that.
I completely agree, George.
Tom, you're a star. Thanks for the call. John is in London on the DUP Tory coalition. John, go ahead.
First of all, George, congratulations on producing the most beautiful child.
Thank
you and your good lady.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the DUP. Now, for the people that subscribe to the Dacre Murdoch axis, who spent the last 6 weeks haranguing Mr. Corbyn for having meetings with Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness and David Irvine of the UVF, it has to be said, over the past few weeks. What are they going to say now to a political party that has been openly endorsed by the Combined Loyalist Military Command, whose leader, Mrs. Foster, only last week was in a meeting with Jackie MacDonald, leader of the UDA. Now, I listened to what you just said about them, and most of the people that vote for the DUP are, as you say, ordinary working class Protestant people. But it still has to be said that some of their views of their politicians are wacky. The creationist element, the homosexuality is abhorrent. And as Jerry Adams said last week, it will end in tears, going all the way back to Ted Heath and James Molyneux, through David Trimble, through Ian Paisley Sr., through Peter Robinson. It's not going to work.
Well, you've made a very powerful case. The DUP are, of course, entitled to their views on these issues, and people are entitled to vote for them on these issues. But you can't eat creationism. The working class as a whole will suffer from a continuation of Tory government, and that will include the working class people that voted for the DUP. So the DUP themselves will be damaged by this coalition. And of course, the response from British people is likely to be absolute horror, especially when they see this coming marching season, that we are now being governed by these people. And I think it will have a boomerang effect. The Tories and the DUP will have lifted a huge stone only to drop it on their own feet. It cannot possibly work, as you said.
Well, in this internet age, there were many people who, quite rightly, hadn't really got an idea of what the DUP actually were and what they stood for. Penny whistles and orange sashes. Now, the Orange Order has already gone to Mrs. Foster and laid down in no uncertain terms that they wish to march down nationalist areas in the marching season, the Garvaki Road being top of their list. And as you said, in this summer, that is provocative and will explode in a catalogue of violence. I would say, and you are more politically astute than I am, that before we are saying remember the 5th of November, the country will have to go into another general election.
On that, I agree. Absolutely, John. Great call. That was John in London pointing out the inevitable consequences of this Tory DUP lash-up. They will seek to march through Roman Catholic areas of the north of Ireland to assert their supremacy, to assert a military victory gained just yesterday, really, in 1690. They will seek to assert their ethno-religious superiority, and the Roman Catholic population will not accept it. The days are gone when the Catholic community in the north of Ireland was cowed and unorganized and virtually defenseless. None of that is true now. The Catholics will rise up against this provocative assertion of ethno-religious supremacy. And there will be tears. There will be fire. God forbid, there'll probably be blood. And the British will then have to confront the fact that we are being ruled by these people in their sashes, with their whistles, with their backward mentality. We are being ruled. And that everything that's going to happen in our country over the next period will be determined by them. If they can't be persuaded of it, it will not be able to happen. If they are persuaded of it, it will happen. What do you think the consequences of that will be for the attitude of British people towards those in the northeast of Ireland who are gathered in a gerrymandered statelet which was created precisely to confound democracy? The Irish people voted in overwhelming number for unity and independence, and the threat of violence and terror robbed them of that unity and of that part of their independence. And it's just not tenable, and Tories must know it. I know Tories who do know it. This will end in disaster. So it's better if the Tories demit office now and submit themselves to another general election so that Britain can have a government which can face the task, big task, of negotiating our exit from the European Union and repairing, healing the deep wounds that exist in austerity Britain. I plead with them to see sense. No good can come of this lash-up with the DUP. Well, say what you like. This is Talk Radio. It's the mother of all talk shows, and I'm George Galloway, and I'm here every Friday night in this pulpit. Say what you like. Nobody else would give me this pulpit. You would not hear anywhere else in the mainstream media these arguments that I am making to you, nor listening to the arguments you're making to me. Now, Jerry Hayes, not just a former Conservative MP, but PPS in the Northern Ireland office, so he knows a thing or two about unionism and, in particular, the unstoppable rise to hegemony in the unionist population of the DUP, first led by the Reverend Ian Paisley, and then by Peter Robinson, and now by Arlene Foster. And the DUP are the reason why Theresa May is still in Downing Street, at least at the time of broadcasting. Let's hear from Jerry what he thinks about that lash-up. Jerry, welcome to the show, my friend.
Nice to speak to you, as always.
Thank you, sir. Now, the likelihood, in my opinion, is that this will end in tears.
Of course it all.
Tell us.
Of course it always ends in tears, doesn't it? You can never trust in Northern Ireland. They always let you down. Jim Callaghan tried to do it. Everyone else tried to do it. But this is all about political survival. So Theresa May will do what she can.
But survival for what, Jerry?
Well, well, just keeping there and stopping Jeremy Corbyn from getting in. I mean, I quite like Jeremy. You and I were elected with him in the 1980s. But John McDonnell, they're rather bad people. He wants to take to the streets. He wants to storm the Ritz. He wants to scare the rich. Not sort of people you want to get into bed with.
Yeah, but the ambition to stay in government just to keep someone else out isn't a very edifying sight and is likely eventually to run out of public sympathy.
Welcome to politics, George.
Yes, but you know, a government has to have a project, and it's not as if there isn't one looming like an elephant in the corner of this room, and it's called Brexit. How can a government seriously, conclusively negotiate Brexit when it doesn't have a parliamentary majority and indeed called an election precisely for that reason?
That's her problem. The interesting thing is you've got Philip Hammond, not someone that you and I will probably take out for a drink. Not that you drink at all, but you know what I mean.
I wouldn't. He wouldn't be my choice to go out for a cup of tea.
No, he wouldn't be my choice
or to go tiger shooting, for that matter,
or
I must tell you.
tiger shooting. Well, I don't know. The tiger might do rather well.
David Davis would be the only one I'd go out tiger shooting with.
You see, now you're getting the nub here, because I suspect Theresa will be gone by the party conference, before the party conference. It's going to be a tricky one. And who would you and I, well, not you personally, but as politicians, Davy Davis is probably the man who can deliver. But what do you deliver on Brexit? And you've hit the nail on the head. You know, we are negotiating, but who's in charge? What are they saying? On the one hand, Theresa May says we must have a hard Brexit. On the other hand, we hear in the newspapers that dear old Philip Hammond wants a softer Brexit. You know, it's a really, really tricky one.
Well, we know who's in charge. It'll be the guys in the orange sashes, because if she brings back a deal that doesn't cut the mustard with them, they'll vote her down.
No, they won't, because the worst thing in the world for them would be to have, they would say, IRA supporting, what's his name? Jeremy Corbyn in Downing Street instead. So that's not going to happen. But hey, come on, George. Some of your supporters in Respect rather like the views, don't they, of the guys in the sashes? You know, against homosexuals, against gay marriage, don't like abortion. You know, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
Well, first of all, Respect disbanded 2 years ago, so you need to get with the programme,
really?
Jerry.
I didn't know that.
When Jeremy Corbyn was elected, when Jeremy was elected as Labour's leader, Respect disbanded, and its members, excluding me, of course, joined the Labour Party to support Jeremy Corbyn. So I don't know quite what you meant by that. I voted myself for gay marriage, and indeed voted for the equalisation of the age of consent when the Conservative government, of which you were a member, rejected it. So
I supported it too.
Yes, but your government, of course, didn't. Your party, rather, didn't. But anyway, that's of minor interest. It's not even a footnote. Not even a footnote of interest. But on issues like abortion and so on, of course, people are entitled to their own views in conscience. And if people vote for the DUP, well, fair enough, that's their right. But you can't have Britain ruled by a frankly wacky group of Ulster loyalists. You can't.
No, but it's not going to happen. You know, it's not going to happen. It's supplying confidence. The Tories, I'm a great supporter of Theresa May, and I'm certainly a supporter of the DUP. This is basically keeping people in power to get a decent Brexit deal, whatever that might be. So we're not going to have the men with the sashes walking down the streets of London, or even Londonderry for that matter, I wouldn't worry too much about that. We haven't got a deal yet.
As someone of Roman Catholic background, I very much am worried about that. But let's park that. Let's park that for a minute, Jerry.
Okay.
The point is, how can the European Union not regard this situation as a walkover in the negotiations? Not since not since Don Coquelle fought Rocky Marciano has there been a more mismatched bout than between an all-powerful EU and a lame duck Prime Minister.
That is why it is going to be in the hand. Can you imagine if we'd said this on air or wrote it a year ago? All power is in the hands of Philip Hammond, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think the deal we're going to get now, there's going to be, you can smell the burning rubber in the air of the U-turns that are going to have to be done. We are going to have to be part of the customs union.
Although the DUP are opposed to that, of course.
The DUP want a soft Brexit.
No, well,
they want a soft.
They want a soft border,
but they want a soft Brexit.
No. They insist on leaving the single market and the customs union.
Well, we will see what happens. I think you're going to get a sea change in politics on this. Because don't forget, okay, people spoke on the 23rd of June last year, but they've spoken again this year. And the majority said, it's time for a bit of common sense on Europe.
Well, I'm not sure what that would mean or how they did it, but I'm grateful to you, Jerry, for...
common sense, George. Common sense.
Actually, 82% of the British electors voted for parties committed to Brexit, 1, an end to free movement, 2, and leaving the single market, 3. And I don't see how that's going to...
No, I disagree.
All right.
Yep.
Jerry, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much indeed. That was Jerry Hayes, former Tory MP, in jolly mood, party mood. Dan says, in a country where 10% of people think chocolate milk comes from brown cows, it's illegal for those panels. Let that sink in. I'm not quite sure what that means. Kieran says, we've witnessed in all its brutal ferocity the violence of the capitalist system. The poor are surplus waste. And Martin Kelly says, drag the landlords and their political cronies in chains through the borough to the Tower, making them stop and apologise to every poor person they have screwed. And there's much more where that came from, I must say. Mal says on an SMS, George, there are obviously people who need to be held accountable, and I understand people who have lost are angry, but a trial by media and political activists doing nothing but ramping up hysteria, and it will eventually blow up in mass violence if we are not careful. Well, I'm for being careful, Mal. That's why I carefully said this, and I shall repeat it. The continuation of Theresa May in Downing Street, having lost her majority in Parliament, risks social peace in Britain and in Ireland. It's not necessary for me to will that. That is axiomatic in the current political configuration. It is an inescapable, logical conclusion to draw. And that was before this catastrophe, this great crime, which I believe was committed against the residents of Grenfell Tower. And if you add one damn thing after another, the Westminster Bridge, the Manchester Arena, the London Bridge, the cuts to the police, the cuts to the fire service, if you add all of these things together with the cumulated rage of people who have suffered austerity only to see the debt grow larger, to see their public services torn to pieces, their public servants to be systematically denied even the smallest of wage increases, whilst parliamentarians partied with their big pay rises. When you add all these things together, this is a very combustible moment. And I want to avoid a combustion, a conflagration. That's why I say Theresa May must go now. And if there's anyone sensible in the state listening to this, you must know that it's true, that no good could come of clinging to power just as Jerry Hayes said, to keep somebody else out. No project, no program, no policy of any worth that can possibly be instituted just to keep somebody else out. If you want to avoid a conflagration, Mal, you better take urgent steps to put out the fires that are burning. Kieran says Theresa May will resign in the near future. She's more toxic than the DUP leader, and that's saying something. Now, I was talking earlier about the tassels of an orange sash, and who's on the line but Ken, formerly of the Highlands, now of Newcastle. Go ahead, Ken.
Good evening, George, and I can assure you I am not an Orangeman. I believe it's all total hypocrisy between the Catholics and Protestants in Ireland. But I have two questions for you, George. I want to know who is leading and directing the vicious, bigoted attacks against the Christian DUP, Tim Farron, and all the evangelistic Christians who believe in the historical and biblical orthodox teachings of the Bible, number one. And the second one, George, I want to know who in the UK is wearing the homosexual jackboots which are stamping upon the DUP, evangelical Christians, and upon the pure moral standards set by God in the Bible. This is what I want to know, George.
Well, which part of Jesus' message of loving your neighbor, of doing unto others as you would do unto yourself, which part of Jesus' message of love did you miss in your avaricious, your completely obsessive eating of the Bible day and night? Which part did you miss?
George, I love Jesus Christ with all my heart. He's my Lord.
Then why
and my
not
Savior.
love? Why not
But
love his sons and daughters?
He wants us to be honest about the truth.
But
why? God is against sin. Don't forget that. God is holy. He is against all sin. That is why he died on the cross and shed his blood for the sin of the world and rose from the dead. And those who reject God's warnings against sin in the Bible will suffer the consequences.
No, it's not. Look, that's not true. Jesus is a forgiver. Jesus said to hate the sin and love the sinner. But when you talk about homosexual jackboots and so on, I find not a scintilla of love in your voice, Ken.
I love you, but I am against sin and the devil, George. Jesus is coming back soon. Listen, and that terrible tragedy with the fire, many warnings were given to the people who didn't do things properly. Right now, there are many warnings giving of the coming judgment of God, and it is being rejected and laughed at and scoffed at. Be careful. God is angry against sin, George, and we must repent and turn from sin and believe in Jesus, not in a church, not in a religion, but believe in Christ, the Savior who died and rose again. And I say that in love for you and in love for every listener. Time to repent and believe in Jesus. In the name of Jesus, I say that.
But you're here on the line to defend the DUP, who are bristling with hatred of other Christians.
That's between them and God. I am here speaking for the DUP because they oppose homosexual marriage and abortion. This is the orthodox teaching in the Bible. Do you believe God in the Bible, George?
Well, listen to me. You're defending them because they're against abortion and homosexuality, but you have nothing to say about the fact, and you didn't dispute it, that they bristle with hatred of other Christians in the north of Ireland. And you know that to be true.
I know that, George. I said to you earlier, those who hate other people are sinners. I don't hate anybody by the grace of God. If they hate the Catholics, they are sinners. If the Catholics hate the Protestants, they are sinners. But God wants us to love one another, but be honest with the truth of His Word. And what's happening today in this country? The Word of God is being watered down, mocked, and Jesus Christ and the teachings of the Bible are becoming a mockery. This nation is now anti-Christ and against Christians and against Jews, and the judgment of God is coming, George. And I'm saying that in love for you.
I love Jesus. I love Jesus just as much as you, if not more. And I believe, that Jesus. I follow what Jesus said.
He said you must be born again, and you don't believe that.
I think I follow the teaching of Jesus of Nazareth rather more closely than you. But thanks for trying to educate me. Here's Michael in Belfast. Oh dear, Michael. I hope you're not going to treat me to another sermon. Go ahead.
Oh, no, definitely not, George. Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm just calling. I've been listening to some of the things you've been saying about the DUP, and it almost seems to me like you're giving them far too much credit. The DUP, you're talking about their reputation. For a start, the DUP have no reputation. I'm just thinking about the listeners, your listeners over in Britain, are listening to what you're saying about the DUP, and I probably think that given the fact that the DUP have won 10 seats, people probably think that all of us people here in Northern Ireland are all homophobic bigots, or we all think that the planet was made 4,000 years ago. All the usual DUP nonsense. So I'd just like to make a point that...
Well, I did just describe them in my tirade with Ken of Newcastle as bristling with hate for other Christians. So I'm not sure I'll let them off lightly, Michael.
Oh yes, I don't disagree with what you say. I would just like to elaborate more on the point. I'm just worried more about what the picture that the people of England are getting.
The people of Britain are about to get a rude awakening as to what you have to put up with day and daily. I'm absolutely clear about that. But the point remains that 10 MPs is not a small number, that a significant number of the people do think they've got a reputation. Most of them are working class people who are about to witness their representatives keeping in power a vicious anti-working class government. And I'm hoping to pierce their consciousness, if you know what I mean.
Yes, George, I completely get it. I try it every day myself. I speak to a lot of DUP voters. They don't listen. The politics here, see mandate, economy, see basic political, normal politics, it doesn't exist here. The only thing here is people vote the DUP, they don't even like the DUP. They hate the DUP, but they will still vote for them because they hate Sinn Féin more. The ordinary politics doesn't exist here. They don't care. Working class voters, they love the Tories because to them, the Tories are seen as being more British, and these unionist voters worship all things British. You know, at the point, there's no point in going down that road because they wouldn't listen. You know, there's no change in them. I've tried.
Well,
I try to speak to people on a daily basis.
And I take my hat off to the efforts that you've made, but there is no alternative but to try. There's no alternative but to go on trying. There's no alternative but to keep saying until we are, if you'll forgive the phrase, blue in the face, that normal politics is what normal people need to get their heads round. That you can't eat creationism. You can't eat a flag. Your politicians are keeping in power a group of cutthroats that have just created the conditions for all these disasters that we've been discussing tonight. Terrorist atrocity, people burning alive in tower blocks, and all the other miseries that the Tories have brought us. And the DUP are going to keep them in power, they hope, for another 5 years, Michael.
It's very sad.
Okay, thanks for your call, and I'm glad you didn't follow Ken in the Highlands and give me a lecture on what the Bible says or doesn't say. Well, I'm definitely back and right in at the deep end. My esteemed colleagues through the glass smuggled Ken of Newcastle on me. I had banned him hitherto, although I think it was Radio Gold. I'm not sure how much further we can get with Ken. Balder the Brave says, love how George Galloway deals with the scaremongering Bible basher Ken. He will not be happy until the world eats itself. And Martin says, let's face it, George, the middle and upper class political and media establishment have always had a deep-rooted hatred for the working classes. Things will have to change, my man, says Martin quite correctly. Ford says, all we want is safe, clean housing. Nothing more, nothing less. John says, was it Pope Francis who said, the uncontrolled pursuit of money is the dung of the devil? Well, I wish I'd said that, but if I hadn't, Pope Francis, my favourite pope of all time, I'm glad he did, if he did. Lizzie Fletcher says, MPs set up fund to help failed Tory candidates, not to help the people of Grenfell Towers. What do you think of that? Well, it's only fair and balanced to point out that Theresa May just put up £5 million for the fund for the victims. The MPs may follow suit. Let's wait and see. Marie says Scotland had 70% public housing before 1979. Tower blocks had 2 stairway sprinklers on every floor in case of fire. And Mal says, always interesting to me how the mass murderers of Sinn Féin IRA can exercise influence and power and do secret talks in the south of Ireland in their assembly. But unionists are demonised if they engage and take their democratic right of seats in government in the UK. Hypocrisy in the extreme for all your blinkered listeners, says Mal in Belfast. He goes on. George, you're spreading total untruths about this so-called marching season. Who the hell told you and your last caller that this is the Orange Order and DUP demands? You're all talking absolute rubbish. Well done for ramping fake news up. Mal in Belfast. And Marie again says, I don't scare easily, but I'm petrified at the upcoming practice of orange marches across west central Scotland. And Alex is in Belfast, so let's stick to Belfast for a minute. Go ahead, Alex.
Hello, George. Good
Hi.
to hear from you again.
And you, sir?
I was listening to what Mal had to say. You read out there, and I can assure you, and as you know yourself, that the marching season in the northeastern counties of Ireland can be very, very chaotic. They disturb everyone.
They used to stop literally outside my bedroom window in Glasgow, not in Ireland, in Glasgow, in order to make sure I was up. So I know everything about orange marches, and I also know that the Catholics in the north of Ireland will no longer put up with this endless, provocative expression of ethno-religious supremacism, any more than black people in the United States will any longer put up with the Ku Klux Klan seeking to assert their ethno-religious supremacy over them.
Well, that's true, George, and I wouldn't even just define that as just Catholics. It would be any sort of right-thinking person to the left of Attila the Hun, as opposed to that sort of sectarian bigotry and right-wing Lollapalooza that is held every year and holds people and communities to ransom. The only analogy I can think of, you're talking about the guy from the Highlands who actually lives below Hadrian's Wall. He sounds like a Christian version of the Takfiris. I'm sure you understand that term.
Indeed. He's an extremist who once denounced me on TalkSport as a follower of the whore of Rome and Babylon and God knows what. So He's an extremist, just like we have Muslim extremists.
Well, from my perspective, there seems to be a lot more Christian fundamentalist extremists, and they seem to have more power, which they shouldn't have in the north of Ireland. They're actually going to planning to get into government with May over in Britain.
Well, and no good can come of it, neither for them nor for us. It will do great damage, actually, to the existence of what they call Northern Ireland, if they are seen to be facilitating a viciously anti-working class government in Britain that the majority of people want to demit office.
Yeah, yes, indeed. The damage will be symbiotic, and it will be felt on both sides, in both countries, on both sides of the Irish Sea. Yeah. I wouldn't want to scaremonger like other people have been doing, but it's a marriage made in hell, and what's going to happen there?
It's a marriage made in hell, and you don't have to be Einstein to work out what this marching season, in particular, is going to be like. And we're going to have to confront, we on this side of the Irish Sea, are going to have to confront the fact that we are now being ruled by the grace and favour of these marchers and their shadowy paramilitary backers. And that will turn the stomach of right-thinking British people of all religions and none, who perhaps have averted their eyes from the conflict in the north of Ireland for some decades.
Oh, that's true, George, and it is well documented that the party that you just mentioned acted during the height of the conflict as a political wing of any of these loyalist death squads.
Well,
and that went without much criticism from the Conservative Party, at the very least, and Blair, etc.
Well, the official Unionists and the Conservatives and Labour have all known all along what the DUP is, and they knew who stood behind it with their illegal weapons and their conspiratorial collusion in violence against innocent people. Everybody who knows the politics of the north of Ireland knows this. And now these people are not any longer only terrorizing you in Belfast, they're about to be ruling us here in Britain. So it may very well be that, as I put it earlier, that they have struggled mightily to lift a huge stone only to drop it on their own feet, Alex.
Well, to quote that bewigged bigot Dilling, it's an appalling vista for you to contemplate, George.
Alex, thanks for your call, my friend. Barry is in Weston-super-Mare. Barry, welcome.
Hello, George. It's nice to talk to you. I've listened to you for many years and admired you for a long time. You're a good socialist.
Thank you, Barry.
Yeah, George, can I say this horrific thing that's happened in London? It's coincided with, the fact that during the election, I'm misfortunate to be in a Tory seat here in Weston-super-Mare, but canvassing, it was very noticeable that people are sick to the teeth with austerity, and this Tory obsession with corporate privatisation was seeing the results of it. But I'm 73, George, so I'm a recipient of that first Labour government of Clem Attlee. My father was a miner, good working class people. The renationalisation of the coal, the nationalisation as it was of the coal industry, and the move towards health, education and houses. And as I say, we were recipients. We got a council house and things were so much better for us, And, things could be better, George. And I'm hoping that we'll be moving away from this Tory obsession, as I say, with this corporate privatisation. For so many years now, we've had it, and people were losing heart and saying, "Oh well, this is how it has to be. There's nothing we can do." But the young have become politicised again, George, and I think the young people have realised, that they can use their power to get something better for themselves. And I'm heartened, George, I'm really heartened by the fact that this change is in the air now.
You and me both. I don't think anything will ever be the same again. You see, there were Labour MPs who didn't think, and sincerely didn't think, that putting a real Labour manifesto to the people and pursuing it with gusto and imagination and efficiency could possibly win an election, could possibly move the Labour Party forward. Others, the Blairites, didn't believe in those policies, don't believe in them. And that's a fundamental difference. Now that the first mentioned know that you can win, you can go forward, dramatically forward, on a real Labour platform, I hope that they will now fall in behind the leader that they did so much to damage over the last 21 months. But the others, those who actually don't believe in the things that Labour put forward at the general election, really should go elsewhere. We cannot have a fifth column of people within who have no other purpose, to quote Peter Mandelson, than to get up every morning and think of ways that they can help bring down the leader of the Labour Party. Am I right on that?
George, you're 100% right. There's so many lessons been learned from that 97 Blair government. Don't get me wrong, George, I was like everyone else, It was a breath of fresh air after the years of Thatcher and all this, everything that we had to suffer as a result of that. But, become disillusioned after a while, George, and I'm a lifelong socialist, like my father before me and my grandparents. But I had to leave the party, George. I'm glad to say I'm back in now since the election of Jeremy Corbyn. And again, for quite a while, people were saying to me, oh, he could never be Prime Minister. Oh, yeah, he's a nut. And all of this. I think now they're realising that this man speaks so much sense. He's got principle. He can be trusted. And he's saying to us all, George, we're better. We're more worthy of what these Tories have been inflicting on us over the years, George. And as I say, I'm just hoping that the young people now will grasp the mantle and take us forward, because they can create better lives for themselves, George. They're better than this. And when I see young people, and I talk to a lot of them, I've got grandchildren, 16 and 19, and when I talk to them, and I'm aware of the fact that there's these 0-hour contracts, that people are doing 3 jobs to make the wage of 1. And this is not the way that we should be treated in this country, George. We're better than that. We need better. And with people like you, George, and I'm all for listening to everything that you say, because you speak so much sense.
Thank you. Thank you, buddy.
Mate.
God bless you, mate. Wonderful, wonderful call. Asif says, hi, George, I missed the first couple of hours of the show, so others must have said this already. It hurts so much that wooden posts wearing red rosettes, who care nothing for Corbyn, are in Parliament, and you aren't. Asif, thank you for that, my dear. And an SMS from an unknown person. I don't have an economics degree, but for the life of me, can you explain how the Tories imposed austerity and increased debt? Where is the money going? Indeed. And Kieran says, Theresa May scattered £5 million on the ashes of Grenfell. How much will she pay the DUP for power? Carl K. says, runaway May is now a dead woman running, it seems. Well, she's a dead woman orange walking. And Mal says, it's Mal, giving you a lot of time tonight, Mal. I'm not a DUP voter or agree with their social views. But Donald Trump does not agree with same-sex marriage. His main vote is from the Bible Belt. He is anti-abortion and does not agree with climate change. Yet British people will want to bend over backwards to get deals with him. How does that work? Well, I'm not sure that many British people want to bend over backwards for Donald Trump, and he doesn't seem to me like strong and stable in his position either, Mal. Craig is in Huddersfield. On you go, Craig.
Hi, George. Nice to speak to you.
And you, friend. Go ahead.
I have to say, I admire the way you're not afraid to talk about the touchy subjects. You just get straight involved.
No.
That way.
I'm afraid of no one but God.
Well, there we go. So I just wanted to sort of give my view on Grenfell, really. So, I mean, this tragedy sort of highlights for me, the very mentality within our government, and in particular, you have to say within the Conservative Party that doesn't belong in government, that shouldn't be there, and that's greed and placing more importance, as we've seen, on increasing profit than on the safety of our people. We forget, we as a people, we agree to the notion of a government under the premise that it helps all of us, that it holds us all in the same regard and protects each of our rights all of the time. And as we've seen today, it's just not happening. It makes the point again, these people are supposed to be looking out for us, not causing our deaths to save money on their landlord payments.
Well, I couldn't put it more powerfully than that, Craig, and I won't try to. That was perfectly summed up. If these people had been wealthy, as most of their neighbours are, most but not all by any means, there would have been sprinklers, there would have been alarms, there wouldn't have been cladding that would go up in smoke at the first whiff of a fire. None of these.
So I'm not sure if you caught the video. I can't remember the guy. He's famous in some way, and he was talking about the fire, that it just doesn't go up that quick. There must have been something that caused it to go up in that manner and spread that quickly. And when you put that with the fire alarms and the smoke alarms and the fire extinguishers and everything else, it's just so avoidable.
It's criminal. It's criminal negligence, and it only happened because the people were poor. And not only that, they were threatened with prosecution for annoying the council by their constant assertion that this was an accident waiting to happen. They were actually threatened that they'd be prosecuted. They were treated, as Sean Berry said earlier, as if they were a pest, a nuisance, when all they were doing was pointing out, as people who lived in the tower, that it was dangerous and could cause loss of life. They couldn't have imagined the extent of the loss of the life that appears to have happened.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I have to say as well, if I was talking to an MP, surely this is just logic. If you're an MP and you're also a landlord, then you shouldn't be voting on a bill that either makes life easier for a landlord or reduces their profit. That's a conflict of interest.
Hallelujah.
Human instinct's going to take over, and in those situations.
And a councillor would not be allowed to do it, and if a councillor did do it, they'd go to jail for having failed to recuse themselves and declare an interest in the matter being discussed. Craig, thanks for the call. I've got to go to Phil on Brexit. Go ahead, Phil.
Hello, George. Great show tonight, mate.
Thanks, pal.
First-time caller. I've just got a little take on the Brexit thing and signing up with the DUP. I personally think that this government would do anything to get that majority vote, because my personal take on it is they're only interested in looking after the financial institutions in London. It creates millions and millions of pounds for that select few of people, and I think they'll give the DUP billions to get their vote, and they will sell us down the river during the negotiations just to keep everything ticking over nicely in London. I think that's what's going to happen. So the hard Brexit, that's what they'll be fighting for.
Well, I don't know about that. Theresa May didn't want Brexit, and an unknown number, I suspect several score, in the Conservative Party in Parliament don't want Brexit either. And the DUP wants a hard Brexit in some respects on the customs union, on the single market, but doesn't want a hard Brexit on other issues. So we're in a real mess now. And
massive mess.
Britain,
one government against 27 governments. There's only one winner, isn't there?
Well, especially if that one government is crippled, if it is a lame duck government, which a government, depending on the DUP, is by definition a lame duck government. Britain needs, as Mrs. May herself told us, a strong united government to go into these Brexit negotiations. And that's why she called the election. And it deprived her even of the majority she already had. So we need a new election now so that we get the chance to elect a strong, united British government. And that's what I hope will happen. Phil, thanks for the call. George Lewis here. I have to say that the Conservative government, backed up by the DUP, will be a disaster. Theresa May has to go, and has to go right now. We need a new Conservative leader and another general election now. My thoughts entirely. David in Glasgow says, good listening. My point is, do you not think this world, i.e. the UK, is back to front? It's a total mess. Too much PC. The government is all over the place, as one caller said. Let's hear from Robert in Derry in Ireland. Probably the last call. Go ahead, Robert.
Hi, George. Big fan of you a few months back when you were over in Derry, so it's great to hear you back on the air.
I'm back in Belfast quite soon, actually, during the festival. I'm speaking to the Palestine Solidarity meeting during the Phil.
I'll be sure to make the trip, George. I'll look out for that and look forward to it.
Anyway, what would you like to say about your friends in the DUP?
Well, that's something of an issue. I think that here in the north, there's almost like a staggering level of, I suppose, I wouldn't say anger, I suppose, but disbelief that the organisation, their beliefs, are going to almost have a weak government over a proverbial barrel. And I don't think there's much, what's the word I'm looking for, confidence that they are going to be in any way looking out for the interests of the vast majority of the citizens of Northern Ireland or Ireland or
Britain,
the entire United
or
Kingdom.
Britain, yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a government with very small-minded interests determining the beliefs of the men. I suppose the Jeremy Corbyn view on things. It's for the few and not the many, and I think that's what they're going to be pushing. But the reason for the call primarily, I suppose, George, and I'll keep this brief, is I've been watching, interestingly, and I'll look forward to your thoughts on this, but I've always felt that Jeremy Corbyn has been a very principled man, a man who, even if you didn't agree with his principles or his beliefs, was always a very likable man. But I just felt that recently he looked like a man that's elevated himself to a statesman. How he dresses, how he appeared and conducted himself in the television debates and interviews and so forth. It's almost like a man that believes his own destiny. Through all he's gone through, it's like if an alien was looking in from outer space and asked who's leading that country and who do you think is the best man to go forward, there would be only one choice. I just felt that his elevation to statesman has been somewhat admirable and perhaps a surprise to many, but perhaps not a surprise to you.
To some extent, it is even a surprise to me, and I've loved him for almost 40 years and sat with him literally next to him for most of 30 years. He has elevated himself to a kind of greatness, a man who withstood the viciousness of the last 21 months, much of it facilitated by the backstabbers sitting behind him, has emerged out of this chrysalis as a simply wonderful leader who captured the imagination of the country, and particularly of the young people in the country, who has emerged from all the filth that was thrown at him, not just spotlessly clean, but inspiring to millions of people. And right now, I don't know what the odds are, but it must be overwhelmingly likely that Jeremy Corbyn, my friend, is soon going to be the Prime Minister of Britain. And all I can say to that is hallelujah. What a change that will be. And not just for the people of Britain, But for the people of Ireland and the wider world, it is something like a miracle.